On the morning of July 20, 1942, the heat and humidity weighed heavily over Espiritu Santo in the South Pacific. A remarkable engineering achievement was unfolding. The dense jungle that had dominated the landscape barely 3 weeks earlier had been cleared, and American bulldozers were completing the final grading of a 6,000-foot airstrip. The 3rd Naval Construction Battalion detachment, consisting of 387 men supported by 6 tractors and 2 scrapers, had accomplished in mere days what Japanese military doctrine suggested would take months and thousands of laborers. No first-hand Japanese accounts of witnessing this specific feat survive, though intelligence reports would soon convey the reality. Captured Japanese documents and post-war interrogations indicate that Japan's military planners had gravely misjudged the speed and efficiency of American construction operations. Pre-war Japanese assessments, preserved in translated ATIS documents, assumed that after seizing a territory, American forces would need at least a year to establish operational airfields and infrastructure capable of supporting sustained offensives. Reality, however, shattered this assumption. The evidence of Japanese encounters with U.S. construction battalions does not appear in detailed personal diaries or memoirs. Most were lost, but emerges from naval records, strategic decisions, and the fragmentary intelligence that survived. Collectively, these sources demonstrate the profound strategic implications of confronting an opponent whose engineering and logistical capabilities vastly outstripped expectations. The first large-scale exposure of Japanese forces to American construction efficiency occurred during the Guadalcanal campaign, though initial comprehension of its full significance was delayed. On August 7, 1942, American Marines seized Lunga Point, capturing a nearly completed Japanese airfield. The Japanese effort to construct Henderson Field had involved 2,774 laborers, including 1,379 Japanese soldiers, 1,145 Korean laborers, and 250 local civilians working for over a month. Yet, within 6 days of capture, U.S. forces had made the airfield fully operational. The 6th Naval Construction Battalion, the first to see combat, arrived at Guadalcanal on September 1, 1942 with 387 men and 5 officers. Almost immediately, under continuous enemy fire, they began expanding and reinforcing Henderson Field. Japanese aircraft from Rabaul executed daily raids targeting the airfield with Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers. On the night of October 13-14, 1942, Japanese battleships Kongo and Haruna shelled the airfield, leaving 53 craters in the runway. By the following morning, the USOS engineers had restored it to full functionality. This rapid recovery forced Japanese commanders to reconsider their operational priorities. Admiral Yamamoto redirected the combined fleet's main focus from supporting ground operations to neutralizing Henderson Field. The high-speed destroyer missions, known as the Tokyo Express, were adjusted to bypass slower transport ships, directly reflecting the threat posed by the airfield to Japanese supply lines. This strategic shift, driven solely by the existence of a single, rapidly maintained airfield, played a critical role in the eventual attrition and defeat of Japanese forces on Guadalcanal. The first significant Japanese counterattack against Henderson Field was led by Colonel Kanao Ichiki. Confident in his 917-man detachment, Ichiki aimed to recapture the airfield. However, at the Battle of the Tenaru on August 21, 1942, his force was completely destroyed, underscoring the decisive advantage conferred by American construction battalions and the airfield infrastructure they maintained. Although Ichiki's personal documents perished with him, intercepted operational orders from his unit indicate that the Japanese had little recognition of the Americans' engineering and construction capabilities. The Japanese had anticipated discovering an airfield that was only partially constructed and lightly defended. Contrary to these expectations, they confronted a fully operational airbase already accommodating 31 Marine aircraft. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hayakutake, in command of the Japanese 17th Army, organized 3 major offensives to retake Henderson Field between August and November 1942. These assaults were based on the assumption that once damaged, the airfield would be out of commission for several weeks. Following the intense naval bombardment in October, the campaign's heaviest, the Japanese staff projected that Henderson Field would be unusable for at least a week. Yet, the Americans had restored it within hours, compelling a radical re-evaluation of their engineering efficiency that had profound implications for Japanese operational planning. As the U.S. military advanced deeper into the Central Pacific in 1943, the gap in construction capabilities became increasingly evident to Japanese forces. The Gilbert Islands campaign offered a particularly striking illustration of this disparity at Tarawa. During the assault from November 20th to 23rd, 1943, the 74th Naval Construction Battalion accompanied Marine units onto the island. Japanese defenders, numbering roughly 5,000 from the 3rd Special Naval Landing Force and the 7th CISPO Special Naval Landing Force, had spent months fortifying Betio Island. They built a 4,500-foot airstrip almost entirely by hand, a process that had taken an extended period to complete. By contrast, the U.S. Naval Construction Battalion rendered the battle-damaged airfield fully operational in just 15 hours. This remarkable turnaround is not a matter of propaganda or rough estimation. It is verified in the official action reports of the Naval Construction Battalions. Although personal accounts from the Japanese defenders are largely absent, most having perished during the final Banzai charge, the strategic significance of this rapid reconstruction was immediately clear to Japanese high command. Captured intelligence reports later in the war reveal that Japanese officers began acknowledging that U.S. forces could achieve air dominance over captured territory within days rather than the weeks or months previously assumed. This new reality was further confirmed during the Marshall Islands operations in early 1944. At Kwajalein, the 121st Construction Battalion rapidly transformed the captured Japanese facilities into a significant air base. Meanwhile, the 110th Naval Construction Battalion converted a damaged Japanese runway into a 6,800-foot bomber strip capable of supporting B-24 missions against the fortified Japanese position at Truk. The speed and scale of these projects starkly demonstrated the shortcomings in Japanese intelligence regarding American engineering capacity. Before the war, Japanese estimates of U.S. construction output had been drastically low. For example, Japanese planners projected American merchant shipping production at 5 million tons in 1943. The actual output was 19.2 million tons, almost 4 times higher than anticipated. Similarly, Japanese intelligence had predicted that the U.S. Navy would comprise 13,070 officers and 296,000 enlisted personnel by December 1943. In reality, the figures were 219,279 officers, 120,472 officer candidates, and 234,343 enlisted men, a discrepancy exceeding sevenfold. Among all intelligence miscalculations, the underestimation of construction capabilities had the most immediate and critical impact. Japanese military doctrine, as preserved in captured manuals and training guides, assumed that major airfield construction required months to complete. Their units, such as those captured in the Solomons, relied largely on manual labor and rudimentary tools with no operational framework to anticipate mechanized, rapid construction. This fundamental misunderstanding of American engineering capacity had far-reaching consequences on Japanese defensive strategy throughout the Pacific Campaign. In the summer of 1944, the American military's engineering capabilities revealed a stark contrast with Japanese expectations. Japanese commanders were accustomed to minimal construction resources, small numbers of shovels, a few hoses, and a handful of rollers, but they could scarcely imagine entire aviation engineer battalions deploying with over 140. This disparity became glaringly obvious during the Mariana Islands campaign, where the U.S. aimed to establish forward bases for B-29 bombers to strike the Japanese mainland. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, leading the Japanese 43rd Division on Saipan, observed a scale of logistical and engineering proficiency that was unprecedented in Japanese military history. Saipan's Asto airfield fell to U.S. forces on June 18, 1944, a mere 3 days after the initial landing. Within 4 days, the 3rd Battalion of the 20th Marines Construction Battalion, Seabees, alongside the 121st and 18th Construction Units, had made the airstrip operational for P-47 fighters. By July, while combat persisted in the island's northern mountains, the airfield was already being expanded to accommodate the massive B-29 Superfortress bombers. The first of these aircraft, Jolt and Josie from the 73rd Bombardment Wing, touched down on October 12, 1944. General Saito did not survive the battle to document his perspective. He took his own life on July 7, 1944, as American forces closed in on his position. Nevertheless, his last directives, preserved through translation, reflect his recognition of the strategic implications of rapid airfield construction. He anticipated relentless enemy assaults and vowed to defend the territory at all costs, refusing to be captured. While Saito understood the immediate threat posed by the new airfields, he could not fully grasp the magnitude of the engineering feats underway. Transforming Saipan into a base suitable for B-29 operations required moving vast quantities of coral and soil. CBS teams operated bulldozers such as the Caterpillar D7 and Date, up to 20 hours per day, reserving only a few hours for maintenance. The Dates, with 148 horsepower and hydraulic controls, could accomplish the labor equivalent of hundreds of manual workers. The Japanese had no equipment even remotely comparable. When the 17th Thai Construction Unit was captured in the Solomon Islands, interrogation revealed a meager inventory: 5 trucks, a single steamroller, and hand tools. Japanese planners had anticipated that fortifying Saipan would take months, yet the Americans completed multiple functional airfields in just weeks. Perhaps even more astonishing to Japanese observers was the Americans' ability to construct under combat conditions. Japanese military doctrine emphasized the spiritual valor of Yamato Damashi over material or technical capacity. Yet on Saipan, engineers were simultaneously soldiers and builders. Members of the 121st Construction Battalion, initially assigned to support the Marine Corps, engaged in infantry combat while operating heavy construction machinery. This integration of combat proficiency and technical skill was wholly alien to Japanese strategic thought. While Saipan had already shocked Japanese command, the operations on nearby Tinian were even more extraordinary. Between July 1944 and May 1945, the 6th Naval Construction Brigade, numbering 15,000 men, transformed Tinian into the largest bomber base complex in human history. The scope of work, confirmed through Naval Construction Battalion records, remains astounding. 6 runways, each 8,500 feet long, were carved from dense jungle and coral. Northfield alone featured 4 parallel strips capable of launching fully loaded B-29 seconds on missions spanning 3,000 miles to Japan. Westfield added 2 additional runways. The volume of coral moved, blasted, and compacted equaled roughly 3 times the material used to build the Hoover Dam. Japanese forces on Tinian, under Colonel Kyoichi Ogata, numbered around 9,000. While many perished defending the island, the rapidity of American construction was evident even amid ongoing battles. CBS units landed alongside assault troops on July 24, 1944, immediately beginning the monumental task of creating a fully operational bomber base. The ability to simultaneously fight and construct on such a scale and with such speed underscored a level of military engineering far beyond Japanese preconceptions. The Marianas Campaign demonstrated not only the strategic power of airfields, but also the transformative impact of industrial-scale engineering in modern warfare. By the beginning of August, American engineering units had already commenced repairs and extensions on the former Japanese fighter airstrip at Northfield, even as Japanese troops retained control over the southern sector of the island. The original airfields on Tinian had been painstakingly constructed over several months by Japanese forces, relying heavily on forced labor from both the Chamorro population and Korean workers. A captured Japanese engineering document, later translated by the Allied Technical Intelligence Service (ATIS), detailed their construction techniques: manual crushing of coral, hand mixing concrete, and the use of rudimentary tools such as picks and shovels. According to this report, lengthening a runway by 1,000 feet would necessitate 1,000 laborers working continuously for roughly 2 months. In stark contrast, American Construction Battalions, Seabees, managed to extend Tinian's runways by 4,000 feet in under a month, a demonstration of efficiency that left Japanese observers astonished. Interrogations of Japanese prisoners conducted by the Office of Naval Intelligence revealed insights into their perceptions. Although the primary focus of these interviews was military intelligence, several detainees independently commented on the overwhelming capabilities of American construction equipment. One member of a captured naval construction unit remarked simply that the Japanese could not compete with the US Navy's mechanized methods, contrasting their reliance on human labor with the Americans' use of bulldozers and powered shovels. Among Japanese officers, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, who commanded the garrison on Iwo Jima, likely had the clearest understanding of American industrial capacity. Having served as a military attaché in Washington, D.C. from 1928 to 1930, Kuribayashi had traveled extensively across the United States. His pre-invasion letters, later published as illustrated correspondence from the Commander-in-Chief, provide rare glimpses into Japanese assessments of American capabilities. On February 19, 1945, when U.S. Marines began their landing on Iwo Jima, Kuribayashi commanded roughly 21,000 Japanese defenders. He had spent months fortifying the island, creating an intricate network of underground defenses. Japanese construction units had completed over 11 miles of tunnels, hidden artillery emplacements, and subterranean command posts, a massive engineering effort accomplished over an extended period. American forces, however, operated under a distinctly different construction philosophy. They prioritized speed and mechanical power over concealment and manual effort. The 31st and 133rd Naval Construction Battalions landed alongside assault troops, with the 133rd attached to the 4th Marine Division, experiencing the heaviest casualties in Seabee history, 40. Despite these losses and ongoing combat, construction advanced at a rate that would have seemed impossible to Japanese engineers. Within days of the initial landing, damaged Japanese airfields were being restored. By February 26, just a week after the invasion, the first American aircraft, an OY-1 artillery spotter, successfully landed on the repaired strip. By March 4, while fighting continued, a B-29 bomber from the 9th Bombardment Group, damaged over Tokyo and unable to reach the Marianas, made an emergency landing on Iwo Jima, saved by the rapid repair work. Kuribayashi did not survive to witness the full extent of American engineering under fire. He was killed during the final Japanese counterattack on March 26, 1945. Yet his pre-invasion assessments, preserved in Japanese archives and later translated, acknowledged American superiority in equipment and material resources. He noted that the enemy possessed offensive capabilities and machinery far beyond what Japan could match, a prescient observation that did not account for the astonishing speed with which US forces could construct and repair facilities even while under attack. A vivid example of this capability gap occurred on Mount Suribachi. Japanese forces had labored for 2 years attempting to build a road to its summit. Within just 2 weeks of seizing the mountain, US construction battalions had bulldozed a fully navigable road to the top. According to Marine Corps historians, the speed of this achievement reportedly moved a captured Japanese officer to tears, though the precise identity of the individual remains unverified. By the conclusion of the battle on March 26, over 2,400 B-29 bombers had made emergency landings on Iwo Jima, safeguarding approximately 27,000 airmen. The contrast between the painstaking, labor-intensive Japanese methods and the rapid, mechanized American approach highlighted a fundamental divergence in wartime construction philosophy, one that profoundly shaped the course of operations in the Pacific. The airfields that enabled the landings were built and kept operational despite being under constant enemy assault, an eventuality that traditional Japanese military thinking had not considered feasible. The campaign on Okinawa, which commenced on April 1, 1945, offered the Japanese a stark demonstration of the Americans' extraordinary construction capabilities. Colonel Hirami Yahara, the senior operations officer of the Japanese 32nd Army, was in a rare position to observe these capabilities firsthand. Unlike many high-ranking Japanese officers, Yahara survived the battle and later recounted his experiences in his memoir, The Battle for Okinawa, providing one of the few in-depth Japanese analyses of American operational methods. His familiarity with U.S. military practices predated the war. From 1933 to 1935, he served as an exchange officer in the United States, studying at Fort Moultrie and visiting numerous military installations. This experience gave him a nuanced understanding of American capabilities, though the scale and speed of what he witnessed at Okinawa far surpassed his expectations. The figures associated with American construction efforts on Okinawa are striking. Hours after the initial landing on April 1, U.S. forces secured Kadena and Yontan airfields, objectives the Japanese had surprisingly left largely undefended. By April 3, units such as the 58th Battalion Construction Battalion, CBS, and the 1901st Aviation Engineer Battalion had begun repairing and extending both fields. Within a week, American fighter aircraft were already operating from these airstrips, providing critical air support to ground operations. The subsequent construction effort was on a scale that had no precedent. Ultimately, some 95,000 Army and Navy personnel participated in the construction work on Okinawa. The plans were ambitious, facilities capable of supporting 4,000 aircraft, along with the creation of port installations, ammunition depots, hospitals, and supply centers, essentially establishing a fully functional military city. The 8th, 10th, 70th, and 11th Naval Construction Brigades were responsible not only for airfields but for a comprehensive network of support infrastructure, all erected while the battle continued around them. Yahara's memoirs indicate a growing recognition of the Americans' construction superiority, though his focus remained on tactical and strategic developments rather than engineering specifics. He observed that U.S. forces could establish operational bases far more rapidly than Japanese units could launch counterattacks. His account of the Japanese offensive on April 19 illustrates the futility of attacking positions continuously reinforced through newly built facilities. Beyond the immediate tactical implications, Yahara perceived a deeper philosophical contrast between the two militaries. Japanese doctrine emphasized the warrior's spirit, believing that courage and dedication could compensate for material shortcomings. American military practice, by contrast, integrated combat power with industrial capability. Construction battalions were a unique hybrid, soldiers trained to fight who could also operate heavy machinery with expertise. The Japanese had no comparable unit. Their construction efforts relied either on military engineers with limited resources or on conscripted civilian laborers who could not defend themselves. When the 17th Sets Thai unit was captured in the Solomons, interrogations revealed they were purely laborers, lacking combat training or adequate tools, a stark contrast to the warrior builders of the USS CBS. The full extent of Japan's miscalculation about American construction capacity became evident only after the war. The Strategic Bombing Survey of 1945-1946, which included thorough interrogations of Japanese military and civilian leaders alongside analysis of captured documents translated by the Army Technical Intelligence Service (ATIs), confirmed. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukuome, Chief of Staff of the Combined Fleet and later commander of the Second Air Fleet, admitted post-war that Japanese naval strategy had never envisioned the speed at which UST forces could establish bases. Before the war, Japanese doctrine assumed that capturing an island would secure a defensible position for months, giving reinforcements time to arrive. The American capacity to convert seized islands into fully operational bases within days or weeks completely invalidated this assumption. The numbers illustrate the gap. Japanese planners had estimated that constructing a 6,000-foot runway suitable for heavy bombers would require 3,000 to 5,000 laborers working for 3 to 6 months. In reality, a single U.S. battalion of 1,100 men accomplished this in only 20 days, a 5 to 6-fold increase in efficiency. The ability to deploy multiple battalions simultaneously further magnified this advantage. The disparity extended beyond manpower. A single-date bulldozer could move in an hour more earth than 300 manual laborers could shift in a day by 1944 U.S. Forces in the Pacific had hundreds of such machines, while the Japanese had so few that captured bulldozers were considered some of the most valuable war prizes. The gap in construction capability mirrored deeper differences in industrial capacity and organizational structure, illustrating that the American approach to warfare combined operational flexibility with overwhelming technical and material resources, a model the Japanese had neither anticipated nor been able to replicate. Japanese military engineering remained largely grounded in traditional techniques adapted from civilian practices. Labor-intensive methods relying on hand tools such as picks and shovels as well as human-powered transportation reflected both a shortage of modern equipment and a cultural emphasis on personal effort. The Japanese approach treated construction work not merely as a logistical necessity, but as a means to cultivate resilience, discipline, and spiritual fortitude. Manual labor was intertwined with the idea of Yamato Damashi, the indomitable Japanese spirit, suggesting that physical exertion itself contributed to moral and psychological strength. In stark contrast, American military engineering demonstrated the full application of industrial principles to warfare. American Construction Battalions, Seabees, drawn from civilian industries, brought years of practical experience directly into military operations. Their work was guided by techniques commonplace in the industrial sector, such as time and motion analyses, strict maintenance schedules, and standardized workflows. Prefabrication, modular designs, and systematic procedures were hallmarks of the American method, allowing rapid and reliable construction across diverse environments. Standardized materials such as master matting, Quonset huts, and uniform fuel tanks could be mass-produced in factories and transported as ready-to-use systems, a concept largely absent in Japanese practice, which depended heavily on locally sourced materials and bespoke building methods for each project. This contrast gave American forces a decisive advantage in speed, efficiency, and consistency. The psychological effect of encountering American construction capabilities on Japanese troops is discernible through prisoner interrogations, intercepted communications, captured letters, and post-war testimonies, even though censorship and limited documentation obscure the full picture. The overall trend among Japanese forces followed a clear trajectory: initial confidence, subsequent confusion, and eventual demoralization. At the outset, Japanese military doctrine, informed by the belief in spiritual superiority, instilled confidence that moral strength could offset material inferiority. Early successes, including the attack on Pearl Harbor and rapid advances across the Pacific, seemed to confirm this worldview. However, the first direct encounters with American engineering at locations such as Guadalcanal began to challenge this perception. The swift construction and operational resilience of Henderson Field under repeated bombardment revealed an organizational and technological capacity beyond the reach of Japanese forces, regardless of their determination or fighting spirit. By 1943, interrogations of captured personnel increasingly reflected recognition of American technical and logistical superiority. Members of Japanese units expressed astonishment at the scale, efficiency, and sophistication of American equipment and methods. This construction prowess carried profound strategic consequences. American engineers could render every captured airfield functional within days, effectively turning islands into launch points for further offensives. Japanese defensive strategies, which relied on protracted engagements to wear down opposing forces, were systematically undermined by rapid American base construction and the island-hopping campaign. By 1944, the psychological and strategic impact of these capabilities reached the highest levels of Japanese command. The fall of Saipan, which brought Japanese home islands within the operational range of B-29 bombers, contributed directly to the collapse of the Tojo government. Japanese military leaders increasingly realized that each lost island did not merely represent a setback but instantly became a new staging area for attacks directly threatening Japan. In sum, the contrast between Japanese and American military engineering was more than technical. It was a clash of doctrine and worldview. While Japanese construction emphasized endurance, moral cultivation, and improvisation, American methods reflected industrial efficiency, standardization, and strategic foresight. This divergence not only determined the speed and scale of military operations but also had decisive psychological and strategic consequences, shaping the outcome of the Pacific Campaign. The rapid construction of extensive B-29 airbases on Tinian and Saipan outpaced Japan's ability to respond with effective countermeasures. By the latter stages of the conflict, Japanese defensive tactics revealed a sense of strategic desperation. Rather than attempting to repel American forces at the beaches of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Japanese commanders opted to resist from fortified inland positions. This shift reflected a stark recognition: no matter the initial resistance, American troops would inevitably secure beachheads and establish the infrastructure necessary for further operations. Consequently, Japanese strategy moved away from preventing landings toward maximizing Allied casualties. The hope was that the cost of continued fighting would be sufficiently high to compel negotiations for peace. Central to this dynamic was the unprecedented American capacity for military construction. The Combined Base System, CBS, and other engineering initiatives did more than simply expedite base building. They reshaped operational strategy in the Pacific. The famous island hopping campaign relied heavily on this construction capability. By bypassing heavily defended Japanese strongholds and capturing islands with lighter resistance, American forces could quickly transform these locations into fully operational bases. Admiral Chester Nimitz's decision to circumvent Rabaul, the key Japanese stronghold in the Southwest Pacific, was predicated on the knowledge that surrounding islands could be rapidly equipped with airfields capable of neutralizing Rabaul through air operations. This operational tempo represented a dramatic compression of wartime expectations. Japanese pre-war plans assumed that any Allied push across the Pacific would require years of methodical advances punctuated by long pauses to construct supply and support infrastructure. In reality, American forces progressed from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, a distance exceeding 3,000 miles, in under 3 years. Each island captured swiftly became a springboard for the next offensive. Meanwhile, a profound disconnect existed between the reality observed by Japanese soldiers in combat zones and the narrative conveyed to civilians at home. Japanese censorship, extensive even by wartime standards, systematically suppressed information about American logistical and construction achievements. Letters sent by soldiers were heavily edited. Any mention of American material advantages, rapid construction, or technological superiority was routinely removed. The rare uncensored letters, most of which never reached Japan, revealed the genuine astonishment of frontline troops at Allied capabilities. These accounts, however, never shaped civilian perceptions. Propaganda consistently portrayed Americans as morally and spiritually weak, overly dependent on material comfort, and incapable of matching the fighting spirit of the Japanese soldier. Radio broadcasts from Tokyo, monitored and translated by Allied intelligence, emphasized Japanese superiority in spirit over American reliance on technology. The reality that U.S. forces combined material supremacy with the resilience to operate under extreme conditions remained hidden from the Japanese public. Even accurate reports of military engagements were distorted. The fall of Saipan, for example, was depicted as a heroic resistance against overwhelming numbers, omitting the critical fact that American engineers were simultaneously establishing operational B-29 bases. Similarly, the swift Allied advance through the Philippines was attributed to sheer numerical advantage rather than unprecedented construction efficiency. These gaps in information had strategic implications. Japanese civilian morale remained relatively stable until the B-29 bombing campaigns intensified in late 1944. Civilians struggled to understand how American bombers could reach Japanese cities so rapidly given the perceived strength of the defensive perimeter. What they did not know was that U.S. Naval Construction Battalions had erected vast airfield complexes on captured islands within months, enabling long-range bombing operations. By the war's conclusion, the scale and scope of American construction efforts in the Pacific were staggering. The Combined Base System and U.S. Army engineers had transformed the region into an interconnected network of bases that rendered Japan's strategic position untenable. At its peak, Seabees forces numbered 325,000, with 80% deployed to the Pacific Theater. These personnel completed 111 major airstrips and 441 piers, built ammunition storage for 2,558 facilities, and erected warehouses covering 700 city blocks. Housing was provided for 1.5 million troops, while fuel storage capacity reached 100 million gallons. Over 300 bases were constructed across numerous islands. The machinery deployed was equally impressive. During the war, over 50,000 bulldozers were manufactured, with thousands sent to the Pacific. The Caterpillar D7, the backbone of these efforts, weighed 15,000 pounds and could exert a drawbar pull of 25,000 pounds, far beyond anything the Japanese could match. Another innovation, pierced steel planking or mast and matting, revolutionized airfield construction. Each mat measured 10 feet by 15 inches, weighed 66 pounds, and contained 87 drainage holes. By 1943, U.S. factories had produced enough matting to construct 240 runways, each measuring 150 by 5,000 feet. Total steel output equaled the amount required for 600 Liberty ships. These prefabricated materials allowed engineers to convert cleared land into operational airfields in mere hours instead of days. Human efficiency also played a decisive role. At Henderson Field, construction battalions maintained and repaired runways despite enduring 140 Japanese air raids and 2 major naval bombardments. The combination of personnel, equipment, and innovative techniques enabled the United States to sustain a rapid, continuous advance across the Pacific, decisively undermining Japan's capacity to resist. During the night of October 13-14, U.S. forces faced intense battleship shelling, which left 53 craters on the runway. Remarkably, by daybreak, the airstrip was fully operational. The speed of this repair, exceeding the pace at which damage could be inflicted, was unprecedented in Japanese military experience. Records of construction efficiency were being continuously broken. The 20-day completion of the Espiritu Santo airstrip in July 1942 had set an early example. By 1943, the 47th Naval Construction Battalion had managed to lay down a 3,300-foot runway on Vangunu Island in just 9 days. A particularly striking achievement occurred in November 1943, when the airfield at Tarawa was rehabilitated in only 15 hours, demonstrating that Japanese-built facilities could be rapidly captured and made operational almost immediately. The scale of American engineering efforts was exemplified by the island of Tinian. Within a year, some 15,000 construction battalion personnel had developed what became the largest airbase complex in the world. North Field alone, with its 4 parallel runways of 8,500 feet each, could support the launch of up to 100 B-29 bombers per day. This single installation, constructed in a matter of months, had the potential to deliver more ordnance on Japan than Japan's entire military could muster in defense. The transformation of Okinawa was even more extraordinary. Plans envisioned facilities capable of supporting 4,000 aircraft, surpassing the remaining strength of Japan's air forces, as well as ports to accommodate the invasion fleet, ammunition depots for a projected invasion of the Japanese mainland, hospitals for anticipated casualties, and supply centers for millions of soldiers. When Japan surrendered, 95,000 U.S. construction troops were actively building the logistical and operational infrastructure for the final assault. Japanese officers who observed these feats often did not survive the war, yet a combination of surviving records and first-hand accounts paints a vivid picture of their impressions. American construction logs provide precise timelines and output statistics. Japanese strategic decisions reflect an increasing awareness of these capabilities, and a few surviving testimonies reveal professional astonishment and strategic anxiety. Among the most important witnesses is Colonel Hirami Yahara, who survived the conflict and later published memoirs detailing his experience on Okinawa. Yahara described American construction as operating with almost mechanical precision, noting that U.S. engineers sometimes worked half a mile ahead of frontline Marines, surveying and marking future construction sites under enemy fire. In his post-war strategic analysis, Yahara acknowledged that such construction capabilities rendered traditional Japanese defensive strategies ineffective. Any position abandoned by Japanese forces would quickly be transformed by Americans into a base for further advance, a realization that, although too late to influence the course of the war, highlights the strategic implications recognized by some Japanese commanders. Captain Riki Inaguchi, a senior staff officer under Admiral Onishi, the architect of the kamikaze program, offered additional perspective. While his focus was on aviation operations, he emphasized that the U.S. ability to rapidly establish airfields rendered conventional naval strategy obsolete. Each captured island immediately projected American air power farther west, shrinking the Japanese defensive perimeter faster than Japan could respond. The clearest understanding of American construction prowess, however, came not from military officers but from Japanese engineers tasked with building fortifications. Post-war interrogations of surviving members of these units reveal profound professional admiration for U.S. methods. One engineer from the 17th Setai, name unrecorded, reportedly likened observing American construction to witnessing the future, marveling at how machinery completed in hours what would have taken his team weeks of manual labor. Beyond personal testimony, Japanese strategic adjustments underscore a broader comprehension of American capabilities. The decision to avoid defending beaches at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, choosing instead to fight from prepared inland positions, reflected recognition that Americans could establish beachheads and supporting infrastructure regardless of initial resistance. Similarly, shifting focus from territorial defense to inflicting maximum casualties reflected an understanding that American engineering capacity rendered static defense largely futile. The kamikaze program itself can be partially interpreted as a response to American construction. Conventional Japanese aviation required extensive bases, maintenance facilities, and trained ground personnel, as U.S. construction battalions systematically advanced toward Japan, destroying or capturing Japanese facilities. The logistical foundation for conventional air operations eroded. Kamikaze missions, requiring only minimal fuel and no return maintenance, allowed Japan to continue air attacks despite the destruction of base infrastructure. Captured intelligence documents indicate that Japan attempted countermeasures against American construction. Plans included sabotage teams targeting construction machinery and operators, as well as potential chemical attacks to disrupt construction sites. These measures, however, were never successfully implemented, reflecting both the limitations of Japanese resources and the effectiveness of American security measures. By 1945, Japanese homeland defense plans explicitly acknowledged the overwhelming construction capability of the United States. Strategies assumed that any American landing would result in the rapid establishment of large-scale bases regardless of Japanese resistance. The revised strategy aimed not to prevent base construction but to force Americans to pay for every facility with high casualties, hoping that the resulting losses might compel negotiated peace rather than unconditional surrender. By late 1944, senior Japanese leaders had grasped the profound strategic implications of U.S. engineering and construction operations, yet this awareness came too late to alter the outcome of the conflict. The collapse of the Tojo cabinet following the defeat at Saipan signaled a stark acknowledgement within the Japanese leadership that the establishment of American B-29 bases would soon render the home islands directly vulnerable to relentless aerial bombardment. Japanese military actions in response to this threat revealed a growing comprehension of the strategic implications of American construction capabilities. The tenacious defense of Iwo Jima, which resulted in the heaviest Japanese-inflicted casualties on U.S. forces in the Pacific Theater, was driven by the understanding that the island's airfields would serve as critical staging points for fighter escorts supporting bombing raids on Japan. Lieutenant General Kuribayashi's decision to abandon traditional banzai charges in favor of a methodical, entrenched defensive strategy reflected a clear recognition that the construction of these airfields could not be prevented. His focus shifted to inflicting maximum American losses, acknowledging the inevitability of the airfield's completion. Similarly, during the Okinawa campaign, Japanese strategy emphasized protracted resistance combined with kamikaze assaults against American naval forces, implicitly recognizing that the island would ultimately be transformed into a sprawling U.S. military base. Colonel Yahara's defensive plan explicitly accepted this reality. The objective was not to halt American construction, but to impose the highest possible cost in terms of human lives and material. The Japanese progression from initial surprise to eventual strategic adaptation demonstrates a sophisticated awareness of the enemy's construction capabilities, even in the absence of extensive written documentation. The choices made on the battlefield serve as a form of indirect testimony, revealing through action what surviving records do not explicitly state. The broader narrative of Japanese encounters with American construction proficiency emerges less from personal diaries or emotive accounts and more through measurable outcomes, statistical data on construction projects, the conduct of battles, and the strategic decisions of Japanese commanders. While the destruction of many Japanese military archives and the limited survival of first-hand accounts prevent a fully intimate view of Japanese perspectives, the extant evidence offers a compelling account of recognition and adaptation in the face of overwhelming industrial power. The speed and scale of American military engineering in the Pacific were unprecedented. The rapid construction of an airstrip on Espiritu Santo in just 20 days, the reconstruction of Tarawa's airfield in a mere 15 hours, and the simultaneous development of massive B-29 bases on Tinian while nearby battles raged exemplify more than technical proficiency. They illustrate each of these feats represented a combination of organizational efficiency, prefabrication, and logistical mastery that rendered prolonged Japanese resistance increasingly futile once American forces gained a foothold. For Japanese military professionals, witnessing this level of industrial capability must have been profoundly disheartening. They confronted not merely combatants but an entire industrial across vast distances. Positions painstakingly constructed over weeks or months using manual labor could be matched or exceeded in days by American engineers, fundamentally altering the strategic calculus. The accelerated pace of base construction underpinned the island-hopping strategy, allowing American forces to bypass fortified strongholds and compress what might have been a multi-year campaign into a matter of months. These developments brought Japanese cities within reach of strategic bombing far earlier than pre-war planners had anticipated. The Pacific conflict thus became a contest not solely of armies and navies but of industrial systems. Japan, despite the courage and dedication of its forces, could not match the sheer scale and speed of American engineering. Surviving Japanese accounts frequently express astonishment at the equipment, efficiency, and speed of U.S. construction teams. Strategic decisions, such as the desperate defenses on Iwo Jima and Okinawa, demonstrate an implicit acknowledgement that American bases would inevitably be built, and kamikaze attacks represented a tactical attempt to counter material superiority that could not otherwise be matched. The culmination of this reality is seen not in sensational anecdotes of American engineering feats, but in Japan's gradual strategic capitulation to industrial constraints. When Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, he referenced the unprecedented destructive power of the atomic bomb, but also implied recognition that the broader strategic situation had evolved beyond Japan's control. Central to this acknowledgement was an understanding that American forces could mobilize industrial strength across the Pacific at a scale and pace that rendered further conventional resistance meaningless. The motto of the U.S. Navy's construction battalions, Consumus Bitumimus, we build, we fight, epitomized a transformative approach to warfare, engineers who could construct vital facilities under combat conditions at near-industrial speed. To Japanese observers, this capability must have appeared almost futuristic, a reality in which traditional measures of valor and spiritual fortitude alone could not offset bulldozers, prefabricated materials, and the organizational might of industrialized warfare. In this sense, Japanese military leaders were not merely confronting an enemy army, but a mechanized system capable of reshaping the Pacific theater in its own image, a force whose momentum ultimately dictated the terms of Japan's defeat. The construction of 6,000-foot airstrips in just under 3 weeks represented more than an impressive engineering accomplishment. It signaled a profound shift in the nature of warfare, one for which traditional Japanese military training had not prepared them. The encounters of Japanese forces with American construction capabilities reveal less through words than through tangible outcomes. The adjustments in strategy, the defensive recalibrations, and the eventual acknowledgement of defeats all convey a story more powerful than any surviving document or personal account. These developments illustrate a military realizing it faced not merely a combatant but an industrialized force, a system whose scale and speed could not be countered by conventional valor alone. The implications of this phenomenon extend far beyond the immediate context of World War II. The rapid industrialization of military engineering, exemplified by the construction battalions (CBS) in the Pacific, set a precedent that remains central to modern military operations. The capacity to establish bases swiftly, to supply forces over vast distances, and to construct infrastructure faster than it could be destroyed became a defining feature of strategic planning. Japanese troops observing these feats were confronted with a reality that exceeded their traditional frameworks of warfare. Their astonishment reflected both the novelty and the scale of what they were witnessing. From a historian's perspective, the scarcity of Japanese narratives on American construction efforts is both a challenge and a lesson. It is frustrating because few personal accounts exist to provide emotional or human depth to the story. Yet it also serves as a reminder that historical events are often driven by material capabilities and organizational systems that contemporaries may not fully recognize or document. The CBS's accomplishments were revolutionary, even if those observing them could not fully articulate their significance. The raw figures underscore the scale and impact: 111 major airfields, 441 auxiliary installations, and support bases capable of sustaining 1.5 million personnel. For Japanese forces, watching entire bases rise from jungle and coral in a matter of days rather than months was a revelation. Each newly operational airfield embodied a strategic advantage, a shift in the tempo of war that traditional military thought could scarcely accommodate. These numbers were more than mere statistics. They were tangible evidence of a new paradigm in warfare, one that moved at a pace previously unimaginable to Japan's military establishment. The transformation wrought by American construction capabilities in the Pacific theater ranks among the most decisive yet underappreciated elements of the war. While Japanese soldiers often matched or exceeded American tactical skill and exhibited considerable courage, they were unable to counter the industrial and organizational superiority that allowed the U.S. to convert captured islands into forward operating bases at unprecedented speed. The CBS's achievements were not auxiliary. They were central to the Allied strategy and arguably as decisive as any battlefield engagement in shaping the ultimate outcome of the Pacific conflict.